Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take the crucial sources, slice them up, and serve you the ultimate geopolitical fast track. We're cutting straight to the core of global power shifts today.
And there really is no greater power shift, arguably, than the story we're tackling now. We are unpacking the trajectory of Xi Jinping. I mean, this is a man who now commands a level of influence and centralized authority really unmatched by any Chinese leader since Mao Zedong himself.
Yeah, the sheer scale, the speed of his rise and consolidation, it's quite a study in modern autocracy, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And we should probably start with the moment that really formalized this seismic change. You have to picture this incredibly choreographed scene. It's March 11, 2018.
Right.
Nearly 3,000 delegates, all clad in these, dark suits, filling the absolutely cavernous auditorium of the Great Hall of the People in Beijing. It's the 13th National People's Congress.
An inaugural session, technically.
Yeah.
But the first order of business, it wasn't some economic plan or a new initiative. It was a vote on a constitutional amendment.
And that amendment, it zeroed in on a specific, really crucial piece of political architecture, something that had been in place since, the early 1980s.
Exactly. The clause was in Article 79, and it explicitly limited the president and vice president to no more than 2 consecutive 5-year terms.
A guardrail.
It was precisely that. An institutional guardrail put in place decades earlier, specifically to prevent the rise of another tyrannical strongman.
Yeah.
Another Mao.
And then the outcome of the vote, well, it felt like an orchestrated inevitability, really.
Oh, completely. The delegates voted almost unanimously. And just like that, the path was cleared for the incumbent, Xi Jinping, to rule indefinitely.
No limits, no rivals. This wasn't just some, minor political tweak.
No, it was the formal shattering of that whole post-Mao tradition. It signaled China's definitive return to, personality cult politics, led by one unchallenged figure.
What's so fascinating for us today, I think, is the extreme contrast. You have the man himself and then the position. So our mission, really, is to trace this utterly surprising trajectory. How did the son of a purged official, a victim of Mao's terrifying, how did he not only survive that kind of generational trauma, but ultimately centralize power in a way that, frankly, exceeds even Deng Xiaoping's?
It's an incredible question. And we're using our source material today to provide, hopefully, a deep, detailed historical biography, but also a comprehensive political analysis. We'll look at his domestic reforms, his global ambitions.
Yeah, we're going to try and cover everything from, the horrors of the Cultural Revolution that clearly shaped him, right up to the modern-day flashpoints we see in the South China Sea, the economic battle with the United States, all of it.
It's a huge canvas.
Okay, let's start at the beginning then. This unbelievable Xi Jinping was born June 15th, 1903 in Beijing.
And just a quick note for listeners maybe new to Chinese naming convention. Xi is the family name. Xi Jinping is the given. It's the opposite of how we use the West.
Right, important clarification. But to really understand Jinping's early life, you first have to understand his father, Xi Jinping.
Absolutely. This wasn't someone who just jumped on the bandwagon late. He was deeply, profoundly embedded in the Chinese communism. He joined way back in 1926.
Wow, that early.
Oh, yes. A longtime revolutionary. He fought in the Civil War and, crucially, against the Japanese invaders starting in 1937. He was the real.
And this detail matters, doesn't it? Xi Jinping was a loyal, pretty high rank. So when the communists won in 1949 and established the People's Republic of China under Mao, the family was initially okay.
They were insulated, yes. Part of the new elite. Living in Beijing, protected, from the grinding poverty and uncertainty that most of the population faced at that time.
Okay, so we need to set the scene a bit. Mao's China after 49, what was the big...
The mandate was crystal clear. Transform China into a global industrial power and do it basically overnight. This led directly and disastrously to the launch of the Great Leap Forward in 1958.
The ambition, staggering, wasn't it? Almost delusional in hindsight.
Mao aimed to industrialize China on the scale of, say, Britain, but in maybe 5 years, demanding these massive increases in output: steel, coal.
And citizens were urged to contribute personally, right? Like melting down farm tools.
Exactly. Melting down farming implements, even cooking pot, to meet quotas for totally unusable, low-quality steel. It was mad.
And the outcome wasn't development.
The opposite. Devastating mismanagement, destruction of the agricultural sector, and a massive, terrifying famine. Scholars estimate the death toll, often called Mao's Great Famine, was somewhere between 30 and maybe even 60 million. Starvation, disease, violence, horrific.
And even for loyal party members like Xi's father, this guess failure meant danger, right? When things go that wrong, someone has to pay.
Precisely. Xi Jinping held a sort of middling bureaucratic role, vice chairperson of the National People's Congress. He wasn't powerful enough to be on. And once the policy's failure became absolutely undeniable, Mao needed scapegoat.
And Xi Jinping became one.
He did. In the mid-1960s, he was purged. The official excuse, as our sources describe it, it was paper thin, almost laughably arbitrary.
What was it?
It was supposedly his role in publishing a biography of a long-dead communist martyr, Mao Zedong, a figure whose legacy Mao had simply decided, apparently on a whim, needed to be erased from history.
So basically, on the basis of a biographical footnote, his whole world collapses.
Completely. The family's world collapsed. They were forced out of Beijing, relocated inland to Henan province. Xi Jinping, once this senior party man was demoted, he became a simple factory worker in a tractor factory, sometime between late 63 and early 65.
Just brutal. But that demotion, that wasn't even the end of it, was it?
No, that was just the beginning of the real horror.
Yeah.
It was immediately followed by the launch of the Cultural Revolution in 1966.
Okay, what was the trigger for that?
Mao feared his power was waning, so he initiated this mass campaign claiming there was this deep-seated capitalist bourgeois conspiracy right within the party bureaucracy itself.
And this campaign unleashed utter chaos.
Utter chaos. Driven by these lawless student gang, the Red Guard. For the Xi family, this meant young Xi Jinping's secondary education just stopped, abruptly halted.
And his father.
Arrested. Jailed. The atmosphere was so toxic, so poisonous, that family members even, reportedly, his own mother, were urged to denounce Xi Jinping publicly as an anti-revolutionary.
Hard to even imagine that kind of pressure.
It is. And the sources really highlight that for young Xi Jinping, this all culminated in probably the most profoundly formative experience of his entire life, the down to the countryside movement.
Right. This was Mao's policy, roughly 1966 to 68. What was the idea behind it?
It was sort of twofold. Deal with the chaos of the Red Guards by getting them out of the cities, and also supposedly instill a sense of proletarian hardship in this educated urban.
So Xi Jinping gets sent off. Where to?
To Shaanxi province, specifically to the remote, deep rural countryside.
Yeah.
And the accounts of his struggles there, they're quite vivid.
You didn't want to be there.
Not at all. He tried to run away multiple times, tried to get back to Beijing or other cities, but he was repeatedly caught by security officials and sent right back to this impoverished village.
So this wasn't some kind of voluntary learning experience. It was political terror, right?
It was involuntary exile, absolutely driven by political terror. But here's the crucial analytical point the sources make. Although he endured years of intense hardship, this experience gave the future leader a deep, granular, first-hand understanding of rural Chinese poverty.
And the stresses between the cities and the countryside.
Exactly. The profound stresses between urban wealth and rural scarcity. He didn't just read about these problems in some report. He lived.
It feels like the origin story for common prosperity, doesn't it? That later policy focus.
You can definitely see the seeds there. He learned as a teenager what it really means to be left behind by the party, by the state. He saw what happens when the central government loses control of the economy, of society. That baptism by fire and the unforgiving heart of Mao's China. It became his political text.
So the worst turbulence of the Cultural Revolution starts side after, but that political cloud over Xi Jinping's family, it didn't just vanish, right?
No, it remained. Yet, remarkably, despite being effectively blacklisted, this is exactly where his political career truly began, in the early 1970s.
Still under a cloud, he starts working as a regional...
Yeah, still working in rural areas, overseeing reform programs. It's quite something that even with his father periodically jailed or under surveillance, Xi just kept pushing. His formal applications for higher administrative posts, they were constantly rejected because of the family's status as, capitalist roaders.
But he persisted. What was his first formal?
His persistence did pay off. In 1974, he got his first formal position, local party chairman in Liangjian back in Shaanxi.
Okay, put that in perspective for us. How big a deal was that?
Well, our sources kind of analogize it to being, say, the chairman of a local village council in a really small, underdeveloped Midwestern U.S. village. It was completely outside the main corridors of power, but crucially, it was power, however small.
And he used it practically, focusing on agriculture.
Incredibly practical. He developed this deep, very specific interest in things like modern fertilizers, soil science, agricultural yield improvements, stuff that had a direct, measurable impact on the lives of the poor villagers right there around him.
So very hands-on, very results-oriented even.
Exactly. And this practical focus, quite divorced from high-level ideology at that stage, pushed him towards technical education.
Which led to his degree.
Right. He managed, through sheer tenacity, to earn a chemical engineering degree from the prestigious Tsinghua University. He got that in 1979. And that timing, it coincided perfectly with the massive political shift that would utterly transform his fortune and China's future.
Because Mao Zedong died September 9, 1976.
That was the moment. Mao's death had this immediate politically stabilizing effect. It led to the rehabilitation of literally thousands of victims of the Cultural Revolution, and that included Xi Jinping.
So for the Xi family, the change was overnight.
instantaneous and complete. Xi Jinping was swiftly promoted. He became a senior official again, essentially the governor of Guangdong province by January 1979.
And Guangdong was key, right, for the economic reforms?
Absolutely key. He immediately became a pioneer in promoting the concept of special economic zone, SEZs. These were the engines that were about to drive China's massive economic revolution.
Okay, so this is the huge ideological sea change we need to underline. Deng Xiaoping takes power in 1978. What's his big move?
Radical market-oriented reform. The goal was essentially keep the autocratic Soviet-style communist state structure politically, but economically, open up, harness the kind of astonishing growth they were seeing in places like Japan and South Korea.
Deng's famous quote sums it up, doesn't it? To get rich is glorious.
That was the shift encapsulated. And these reforms kicked off one of the most sustained economic expansions in modern history. Throughout the 1980s, China's GDP growth averaged a staggering 8% to 11%, year after year.
And Xi Jinping, young, rehabilitated, now technically educated, with his father back in a powerful position.
He was perfectly positioned, ready to ride this massive, unprecedented wave of economic revolution.
And his ascent was pretty quick once the family name.
Rapid. He started working in military departments in Beijing for a bit, then got dispatched to Hebei province in 1982 as deputy party secretary.
What was he doing in Hebei?
Overseeing a really pivotal range of development programs, everything from huge urban projects to, interestingly, fostering a local film industry. He was proving himself to be extremely versatile and maybe more importantly, enormously capable as a regional administrator.
Someone who actually got things done.
Which is a rare and valuable commodity in a vast, sprawling bureaucracy like China.
And that capability clearly got noticed higher up, which leads to his next big, Fujian.
The Fujian decade and a half, yeah. Starting in 1985, he gets promoted to vice mayor of Xiamen in Fujian province. And he'd end up spending 15 years there, overseeing this absolute explosion of economic development. Fujian was really ground zero for turning China into the workshop of the world.
And he wasn't just implementing policy, he was thinking about it too.
Oh yes, he was both a doer and a theorist. Our sources show he wrote these quite sophisticated papers promoting economic growth centered on this idea of islands of development.
Islands of development, what does that mean?
Basically, designating focal points, major cities that would draw in immense investment, and then building the supporting infrastructure needed, airports, highways, massive building projects. This model really became the blueprint for regional Chinese expansion all through the 1990s.
It's interesting, alongside this intense professional focus, his private life also seems quite revealing about his ambition, his first marriage.
Right, in 1979 to Qi Lingling, daughter of a prominent diplomat. By all accounts, it was a pretty tempestuous relationship.
And it ended because she wanted to leave China.
It speaks volumes, doesn't it, about his single-minded dedication to politics. The relationship reportedly ended in separation around 1982 because she wanted to move to Britain. Her father was the Chinese ambassador there at the time. She refused point blank.
He wasn't leaving.
No way. His political career, his service to the party, it took absolute priority over family convenience, personal migration, anything else.
That decision really cemented his path, didn't it?
It did. He remarried in 1987 to Peng Liyun. She was 10 years younger and already a nationally famous singer, later an actress, a real powerhouse in her own right. They had one daughter, Xi Ming, born in 92.
But despite this high-profile marriage, his public persona throughout the 80s and 90s, it's described as quite enigmatic.
Yeah, remarkably so. Those who worked with him widely described him as, well, unemotional. Stable, giving almost nothing away in terms of personal views or, crucially, ambition. He was the classic blank canvas.
Perfectly suited for climbing the ladder in that opaque system.
Exactly. Perfectly suited to the highly opaque and fiercely competitive world of ascending Chinese politics. His consistency and, above all, his effectiveness were his only real public attributes.
Okay, so he spent nearly 2 decades proving himself as this highly effective regional administrator. Then comes the final, really blistering stretch of promotions, kicking off around 1999.
That's right. 1999, he's appointed governor of Fujian, proper governor this time. Then, just 3 years later, comes the truly crucial jump.
Where did he go next?
2002, he moves to Zhejiang. That's a key eastern coastal province, a major economic powerhouse. He became the interim governor there. But this promotion was immediately paired with his elevation onto the national stage.
The dual rise in 2000. So Governor Zhejiang and...
Simultaneously, he becomes a member of the 16th Central Committee. Now, this is the main body of senior party politicians that instantly places him among the, few dozen most powerful figures in the entire country. He's arrived.
And it's in Zhejiang, apparently, that he cultivates this reputation that becomes invaluable later on.
Yes, the anti-corruption stance. He took a very strong, very visible stance against corruption there. Now, think about the context. This is an era of rapid economic expansion, but also rampant regional graft that's threatening the party's legitimacy.
So being seen as clean was a huge asset.
Massive strategic asset. Being seen as clean, disciplined, above reproach, it set him apart.
And that reputation, discipline, effectiveness, clean hands, it catapults him right into the inner circle in 2000.
Directly. He's appointed to the Politburo Standing Committee. This is a group of just 7 members. 7. It is the absolute, unquestioned heart of the PRC government. Xi Jinping had reached the apex of power.
Let's just pause on that. From regional administrator in Fujian to one of the 7 most powerful people on Earth in less than 20 years.
The speed is breathtaking, really.
A year later, 2008, he gets another bump, vice president.
Right. Elected vice president of China. That makes him the second most powerful man in the country, right during the peak of the great financial crisis. He spends the next 5 years basically watching, learning, and clearly preparing to succeed the incumbent Hu Jintao.
And that final transition, when it came, it was smooth.
Meticulously planned and flawlessly executed.
No.
Late 2012, he's confirmed as General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party. Then, the following March 2013, he's elected president of the Politburo.
And the vote count for president, it wasn't close, was it?
Not even remotely. It's not just trivia. It's the final act of this perfectly managed campaign. He secured 2,952 votes out of 2,955 delegates.
Wow.
That level of near unanimous confirmation. It wasn't earned through, genuine popular acclaim in a democratic sense. It was the result of a successful, highly choreographed internal campaign by a man who clearly left nothing to chance.
And this brings us right back to where it started, really, the precedent that he shattered.
Exactly. Since Mao's death, the party had carefully engineered this system. Leaders stuck rigorously to serving either 1 or at most 2 5-year terms. It was the institutional break, designed specifically to prevent the disasters of Mao's lifelong rule.
But that break is now gone.
Completely dismantled. As we're speaking now, in 2025, Xi Jinping is in the middle of his 3rd term. He's ruled for 12 years and counting. That 2018 constitutional amendment simply legalized the political reality that had already formed. He is the undisputed, unchallenged leader of China. He's effectively resurrected the kind of supreme personal authority that the party thought it had safely buried with Mao Zedong decades ago.
So once a leader gets that kind of consolidated, indefinite power, the big question is, what's the plan? What's the guiding?
Well, Xi's rule is this complex blend. On one hand, ideological rigidity, but on the other, quite pragmatic economic governance. And it's all underpinned by his own official political orthodoxy. Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era.
Okay, that's quite a mouthful. Let's unpack that. What does Xi Jinping thought actually mean in practice?
It's definitely a progression from Deng Xiaoping's ideas, but it's really anchored by Xi's personal interpretation of history, especially Mao's failures and, crucially, the collapse of the Soviet Union.
He takes a long view, doesn't he?
A very long view of China's development. He frames achieving China's global and economic goals as a struggle of generations, which suggests that, short-term setbacks or failures, they're acceptable, even expected, as long as that long-term, multi-generational goal of achieving global dominance is maintained.
And central to this whole thought is the Soviet lesson. What did he learn from the USSR?
Our sources indicate he studied it intensely. Why did the Soviet Union, which was a superpower by the 60s, just collapse in 1991?
And his conclusion was
that the primary failure wasn't really economic ideology, it was the loss of political discipline. Specifically, the collapse of strong central party leadership, combined with rampant corruption among these semi-independent provincial rulers. Once that corruption took hold and Moscow lost its grip, decay was inevitable.
So Xi Jinping thought mandates the exact opposite.
Precisely. Absolute, very strong central government control over all facets of Chinese life. He sees himself not just as some pragmatic administrator, but as a committed Marxist-Leninist, dedicated to preventing that Soviet fate from ever happening to China.
Which explains the insistence on complete party control over everything, the economy, the media, and maybe especially the military.
Absolutely, especially the rapidly expanding military.
Now, how does this ideological rigidity square with his core domestic economic common prosperity?
Well, the economic miracle of the 80s and 2000s, while spectacular, created these huge wealth disparities, right? The urban elite got incredibly wealthy, exponentially so, while vast rural areas were just left behind.
And this connects back to his own youth, doesn't it? His time in Shaanxi.
Direct. Common prosperity aims to address that uneven wealth division. The goal is essentially to redistribute some of the wealth acquired by the urban elite to a broader mass of society.
How does that translate into specific policy?
Well, Xi introduced policies that definitely favor greater development of rural communities, diverting investment away from the already congested megacities, trying to foster larger, regionally important towns instead. The overall goal is lifting hundreds of millions more people into a sustainable middle-class existence, fulfilling the party's core promise of economic stability for everyone.
And the most visible manifestation of this policy has been the massive infrastructure and building.
Oh, it's undeniable. Our sources describe it as literally the largest middle-class building boom in human history. We're talking about state-owned companies just erecting enormous residential tower blocks, creating entirely planned cities and districts where just decades ago there was only countryside.
He's definitely the architect of this rapid physical transformation, but there's a big caution attached to this, isn't there?
A critical caution, yes. The sheer scale of this program has become excessive. The state-owned building conglomerates have taken on absolutely staggering amounts of debt, and the result is the increasing prevalence of ghost estates in towns.
These aren't just a few empty houses, are they?
No. These are massive, planned urban centers, often fully completed roads, parks, utilities, everything, but sitting almost entirely empty. It's a dramatic, very tangible symbol of China prioritizing the appearance of growth over sustainable demand. And it's leading to massive financial trouble for huge conglomerates like Evergrande.
Okay, shifting gears economically, Xi's government has also moved beyond just being the workshop for cheap goods, right? There's this new model.
Yes, the giant startup investment agency model, operating on a national scale. It's a remarkable shift in strategy.
How does it work?
Instead of waiting for private industry to lead innovation, the state just pours immense amounts of state capital into literally thousands of companies, all focused on developing advanced, often high-risk technology.
Well, like what kind of tech?
Electronic cars, think BYD, cutting-edge solar panels, mobile phones like Xiaomi, software, massive AI research centers like DeepSeek, and advanced robotics, companies like Unitree Robotics. It's across the board.
What's the underlying strategy here? It sounds incredibly risky.
It is risky. The strategy is based on a pretty brutal calculation. They fully acknowledge that the vast majority of these state-funded companies will probably fail. They'll consume billions in state capital and just disappear. But the long-term goal is to cultivate the few winners. Because the one or two companies that do succeed, the one that turns into a global giant like DeepSeek or successfully challenges established players like Tesla, that one winner pays off the entire initial investment tenfold, and it guarantees China's dominance in a crucial high-tech sector of the future world economy.
It's like national security venture capital on a continental scale.
That's a very good way to put it. High risk, high reward, played on a massive scale.
However, this success story comes with a big asterisk, does the consistent counter-argument from Western competitors.
Yes, the persistent accusation that this entire model is heavily predicated on intellectual property theft and industrial espionage.
What's the claim there?
Western critics argue, pretty consistently, that Chinese firms, often backed by state funding and maybe state intelligence, engage in systematic reverse engineering of proprietary technology acquired through, let's say, various means.
Yeah.
And then they use that acquired knowledge to mass produce cheaper, often state-subsidized alternatives, deliberately undercutting Western prices globally. The claim is the model is less about organic innovation and more about state-sponsored market disruption and, frankly, theft.
Right. Finally, on the domestic front, we have to talk about maybe the most visible tool of Xi's consolidation, the anti-corruption drive, the whole Tigers and Flies campaign.
Launched almost immediately upon his ascent, targeting illegal enrichment at absolutely every level, from minor abuses in social services right up to massive bribes for building contracts.
On one level, you could argue it's necessary discipline, right, for a rapidly expanding, often chaotic economy.
You could. And the sheer statistics are staggering. Over 120 senior officials, the Tigers, have been prosecuted, and more than 2 million officials in total have been censured or charged with everything from petty graft to major corruption.
But the drive serves another purpose too, doesn't it? Connecting back to that Soviet lesson.
A crucial dual purpose, yes. It enforces discipline, absolutely. But maybe more importantly, it eliminates political rivals. It clips the wings of anyone, anywhere in the system, who might be becoming too powerful, too independent. It's the ultimate expression of absolute party supremacy.
And the cautionary tale here is the Jack Ma story.
The perfect instructive anecdote. Jack Ma, the incredibly charismatic, globally famous head of Alibaba, after he made some thinly veiled criticisms of the government's banking regulations in late 2020, poof.
He just disappeared from public view.
Essentially, yes. Removed from public view for months. His Ant Group's massive IPO, which was said to be the biggest in history, was halted literally days before launch. He was politically sidelined, demoted, even though he seems to have retained most of his wealth.
What was the signal being sent there?
A clear, chilling signal sent globally. No corporate titan, absolutely no one, no matter how wealthy or influential, is immune to the party's absolute power under Xi Jinping. The anti-corruption drive ensures compliance. From the grassroots local official right up to the tech billionaire, everyone must toe the line.
Okay, so once Xi has sort of enforced that domestic compliance using tools like the anti-corruption drive, he seems free to turn his attention outward more forcefully, launching what's arguably his single most ambitious foreign policy, the Belt and Road ERR.
Launched back in 2013, yeah, sometimes called the New Silk Roads. The scale here is just truly mind-boggling.
Describe it for us. What is it? fundamentally?
It's basically a global development program. China loans, or sometimes gives over $1 trillion, that's trillion with a T, to scores of nations across, all to develop key and
But it's not just charity, right? There's a strategic purpose.
Oh, definitely not just philanthropy. The entire purpose of this infrastructure, the roads, the bridges, the ports, the airport, is to facilitate the speedy transport of Chinese goods out to global market and crucial raw materials back into China.
Let's trace these routes because they really map out China's 21st century ambitions, don't they?
They absolutely do. They're the physical manifestation. You're talking about two main types of roads. First, the traditional Silk Road, the land routes, running across the massive Eurasian landmass.
Where do they go?
Well, one major route runs north of the Himalayas, cutting through Central Asia, Kazakhstan, places like that, and eventually heading towards Eastern Europe. Another vital land route runs south of the Caspian Sea, navigating through the Middle East, reaching North Africa, and then potentially entering the Mediterranean basin.
And the second type of route?
The marine route, equally vital. These start from China's huge modern port, move south into Indonesia, then traverse the vast Indian Ocean.
And then they branch out.
Exactly, they splinter, either heading north towards the Horn of Africa, up through the Red Sea and the critical Suez Canal into the Med, or they move south, down towards East Africa, and potentially around the Cape of Good Hope to reach the Atlantic.
And the ambition for control is clear in some specific examples like Greece.
Absolutely. Look at China's attempt, largely successful, to buy the port of Piraeus in Athens. This was right when Greece was facing its major financial crisis in the mid-2010s. Securing Piraeus gave China a critical strategic European endpoint for one of those new Silk Road, a direct gateway into the entire European economic zone.
So this vast economic projection, the BRI, it's like the engine driving China's soft power expansion.
It's a huge part of it, yes. And we should be clear on terms here. Hard power is military force, tanks, ships, armies. Soft power is influence you acquire through more amiable, conciliatory means, giving aid, economic cooperation, fostering partnership.
For decades after World War II, the U.S. was the big soft power player, right?
Preeminent, yes. Leading through things like the Marshall Plan, building alliances. Now, China is actively, consciously pushing the U.S. out of that role, particularly, and maybe most dramatically, in Africa.
It's a massive reversal, isn't it?
A dramatic reverse. Go back 50 years. American governments were the largest single source of foreign aid and cooperation on the African continent. Today, China is the undisputed biggest foreign player, full stop.
Where do you see that most clearly on the ground?
Well, if you look at resource-rich areas, say the Congo today, you are far more likely to encounter Chinese mining companies bringing technology, investment infrastructure than you are American or European. The BRI just accelerates this whole process by showering key allies with investment.
Like Ethiopia.
Ethiopia is a prime example. It's a regional power, strategically located on the Horn of Africa. Under Xi's tenure, China has poured nearly $10 billion in investment there. That buys enormous influence.
And this push isn't just economic, it's cultural and propagandistic, too.
Definitely. The number of Confucius Institutes, these centers designed to promote Chinese language, culture, and, let's be frank, political interests abroad, has absolutely ballooned under Xi. And then in 2018, he ordered the creation of the International Communication Center, specifically tasked with directing and coordinating foreign-related propaganda programs globally.
We saw that strategy play out recently, didn't we, during the trade wars?
A perfect real-time example. During the volatility of 2025, you had the U.S. launching trade skirmishes, imposing major tariffs on various global partners. Meanwhile, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi was on this seemingly endless global tour.
Positioning China as the alternative.
Exactly. Positioning China as this stable new partner, offering economic cooperation, often without the heavy political strings like human rights conditions that sometimes come attached to Western aid or investment.
Which leads to this maybe more subtle but incredibly powerful element of China's economic strategy, the corporate law.
It's fascinating. Because of the system of state influence, state ownership in some cases, and simply the sheer dependence of foreign multinational corporations on the massive Chinese consumer market. These companies essentially get converted into powerful lobbyists for Beijing's interests, but operating within their own home country.
Can you give an example?
Take Apple. Its supply chain is deeply embedded in China. Its consumer base there is huge. Because of that dependence, Apple effectively acts as a powerful, albeit non-official, foreign lobbyist for China within the U.S. political system.
How so?
Well, this dependence was crystal clear during the clashes over the U.S.-China tariffs back in 2025. Apple was heavily advocating against high tariffs to protect its supply chain and its bottom line. In doing so, it was effectively promoting Beijing's desire for economic stability and open trade.
And it's not just U.S. companies.
Oh, no. Look at a European giant like Volkswagen, hugely dependent on the massive Chinese car market. This dependence has arguably compelled VW to actively promote Chinese interests within Europe, fostering stronger economic and political ties between Beijing and Berlin.
It's an incredibly sophisticated way to use global capitalism against itself.
It is, leveraging economic gravity to pull Western politics, subtly but powerfully, towards Beijing's interest, ensuring that major Western corporations have a vested financial interest in maintaining stable, positive relations with China, regardless of other political tension.
Okay, so while Xi Jinping is out building roads and projecting power globally back home, the central theme seems to be absolute control. And it's technologically sophisticated control now, right?
Absolutely. The police state system itself, well, he inherited the basics of that. It was established way back after the Civil War. But under Xi, it has been dramatically modernized and expanded into what we can only call a comprehensive surveillance state.
How does that work in practice?
Well, the sources are very clear. The system now leverages pretty much every instrument of new technological surveillance you can imagine. AI-driven cameras, facial recognition, massive data collection, combined with really heavy regulation of the internet and state media.
Banning websites.
Oh yeah, banning sites like Wikipedia is standard. But crucially, they also scrub any historical discussion of Marxism or communism itself that deviates even slightly from the approved current party narrative. The end result is that ordinary Chinese citizens have virtually no access to any information the government doesn't explicitly want them to have. It's a digital fortress.
And what about the more traditional forms of repression, like the penal system?
Well, if you look at incarceration rates globally, the U.S. still has the highest per capita rate. But China is a close second in terms of the sheer number of people in prison. And when it comes to the number of citizens executed by the state each year, China remains far, far ahead of any other country.
No, it's important context. As you said, Xi didn't start these abuses. There were horrific things happening before him.
That's crucial context, yeah. Previous regimes oversaw, for example, the truly horrific persecution of Falun Gong practitioners, which included credible allegations of forced organ harvesting on a mass scale. So Xi did initiate state brutality. But what he has done is dramatically expand and technologically modernize the surveillance state, making it this unique, deeply disturbing 21st century version of authoritarian control.
And nowhere is that repression more acute, more internationally condemned than in the Uyghur atrocity.
Yes, this northwestern province, it's historically inhabited by Turkic and Mongol people, predominantly the Islamic Uyghur, and they have a long history of resistance to Central Party. You might remember the Urumqi riots back in 2009.
Right, but things escalated massively.
Dramatically. Although a more repressive approach arguably began under his predecessor, Hu Jintao, it was really under Xi's watch that the very worst elements were perpetrated. Xinjiang has been utterly transformed into a comprehensive technological surveillance province.
We're talking cameras everywhere.
AI-driven state cameras monitoring every street, every corner, every citizen's movement. It's dystopian.
And the specific actions against the Uyghur people themselves.
Devastating. Estimates suggest something like 16,000 mosques have been systematically destroyed or desecrated, stripped of their religious. Crucially, these vast re-education camps and prisons have been established. Millions of Uyghurs are believed to have passed through them, often forcibly separated from their families for years.
But the aspect that really pushes this into a different category is the demographic element, isn't it?
That's the truly terrifying aspect, yes. The one that defines this as a potential 21st century genocide. Birth rates in Xinjiang among the Uyghur population have absolutely plummeted over the last decade, and our sources confirm the understood practice of widespread, systematic, forced sterilization being enforced by Xi's government among...
So the policies described forced sterilization, mass incarceration, destruction of cultural heritage.
Yes. As described in the source material, these policies taken together do indeed constitute genocide under the definitions outlined in international law. It's not just a human rights issue in the abstract. It's potentially one of the gravest state crimes imaginable, driven by this desire for total control and, frankly, ethnic conformity. It's a dark, dark stain on Xi's legacy.
The second major front of repression under Xi has been the rapid and aggressive dismantling of one country, two in Hong Kong.
Right. Hong Kong was returned to Chinese sovereignty by the UK back in 1997. The deal, the Sino-British Joint Declaration, promised Hong Kong would maintain its autonomy, its Western-style liberal system, rule of law, free press for 50 years, until 2047.
But Xi Jinping basically tore up that...
Aggressively crushed it, yes. The pressure really started mounting in 2019. Beijing pushed the Hong Kong government to pass this highly controversial extradition law.
What would that have done?
It would have allowed Hong Kong citizens to be sent to face prosecution on the mainland under the mainland's opaque legal system, a clear, fundamental violation of the one country, two systems principle.
And that provoked massive protests, huge, sustained protests.
It did. But Beijing's response wasn't negotiation or de-escalation, it was further aggression. In 2020, they bypassed the Hong Kong legislature entirely and imposed the severe Hong Kong National Security Law, NSL, directly from Beijing.
And the impact?
It was the death knell for Hong Kong's autonomy. The NSL opened the door for Beijing to completely eliminate free speech, imprison pro-democracy politicians and activists, shut down independent media outlets, and systematically dismantle all the fundamental legal and societal differences that had existed between Hong Kong and mainland China. It formalized the end of Hong Kong's promised autonomy.
And by 2022, the process was pretty much complete.
Sealed, yes. She personally visited Hong Kong in 2022 to oversee the appointment of the hardliner John Lee Ka-chiu as the chief executive. Lee is a former police official known for his tough stance during the protest.
And he's been overseeing the final dismantlings.
Exactly. Overseeing the total dismantling of autonomy, implementing further security. And she publicly praised him in 2024 for his effectiveness in enforcing these laws that effectively crush all forms of political dissent in the city. Hong Kong as the world knew it. Okay, shifting our focus back to foreign policy now. Beyond the sort of economic leverage the Belt and Road, Xi's tenure has really been defined by several sharp, specific geopolitical flashpoints. Let's start with the South China Sea.
Right. This body of water, geographically, it's relatively small compared to the big oceans, but strategically, it's vital.
Hugely vital. It's one of the world's absolute busiest shipping routes. Critical for all that container traffic moving between East Asia, Southeast Asia, India, Africa, Europe. International law usually limits a nation's territorial waters to about 22 kilometers, 12 nautical miles from its mainland coast.
But China's claim is much bigger.
Massively bigger. Under Xi, China has become aggressively revisionist here. They claim almost the entire South China Sea based on contested historical arguments, often using this 9-dash line map. They claim tiny, often uninhabitable islands, rocks, and atolls, far from their mainland as traditional Chinese territories, trying to use them to extend their maritime jurisdiction thousands of kilometers out.
And this led directly to the controversial Artificial Islands program.
Exactly. China has physically dredged sand and concrete onto shallow coral reefs, particularly in places like the Paracel and Spratly Island, turning them into large, militarized artificial islands, complete with runways, ports, and missile batteries.
And this is coupled with more aggressive naval activity.
Yes, much more aggressive naval and Coast Guard activity, intimidating and restricting Vietnamese and Filipino fishing boats, and even naval vessels in waters internationally recognized as belonging to those countries.
What's the likely outcome here? Is war imminent?
Well, the sources generally suggest that this conflict is unlikely to lead to immediate, large-scale war between major powers. That seems too risky even for Beijing. But that's maybe thin comfort.
Why?
Because China's long-term strategy seems to be simply to exert control through continuous presence, pressure, and salami-slicing tactics, gradually ensuring the entire region operates under Beijing's de facto maritime authority, regardless of international.
Okay, then there's the biggest potential flashpoint in Asia, maybe the world, the Taiwan question.
As Taiwan, officially the Republic of China, has been ruled independently by the remnants of the Chinese nationalist movement since they lost the Civil War in 1949. It's critical geopolitically, important for its democratic society and population, and perhaps most importantly now for its absolute dominance in the high-tech electronics, especially semi.
And Xi's position on Taiwan is unambiguous.
Ideologically, he's completely committed to the concept that Taiwan must eventually reunify with the mainland. It's central to his China dream narrative, and his rhetoric has become increasing.
Like the New Year's.
Exactly. At the end of 2024, he proclaimed a major New Year's speech that, quote, "No nation or power can stop the eventual reunification of China and Taiwan." And he's backed this up by ordering naval drills around Taiwan that are far more aggressive, larger scale, and more frequent than anything seen really since the crises of the 1950s.
But let me push back on that a bit. If the rhetoric is so absolute, the military exercise is so aggressive, isn't there a real risk he miscalculates? Invade. Our sources suggest an actual destructive invasion is doubtful, but why is that Putin less the idea that invasion brings ruinous sanctions? Why is that seen as such an absolute deterrent for Xi?
It's a fair question, but the analysis hinges on Xi Jinping being fundamentally a deeply conservative pragmatist when it comes to high-stakes economics that could threaten party stability.
Explain that.
Okay, a destructive invasion would almost certainly ruin Taiwan's critical high-tech economy. It would destroy the very semiconductor fabs, the technological assets that China theoretically seeks to acquire. So that makes little strategic sense.
And the international reaction.
China would instantly face massive, crippling international sanctions, similar to or likely worse than what Russia experienced after invading Ukraine in 2022. That could potentially crush the Chinese economy overnight, or at least cause immense instability. Xi simply cannot risk the economic stability that the Communist Party relies on for its core legitimacy.
So if not invade invasion, what's the probable strategy then?
Well, the analysis suggests a subtler, more drawn-out campaign, taking a page maybe from some aspects of the Putin lesson book but applied differently, attempting to establish a highly visible, well-funded, pro-Beijing political party within Taiwan. Combine that with intense economic pressure, diplomatic isolation, maybe cyber warfare, information campaigns, all designed to facilitate a voluntary or semi-voluntary union over time, rather than a hugely costly and risky military conflict.
Okay, moving on. We absolutely have to address the COVID-19 crisis. That felt like the biggest sustained challenge to Xi's personal authority power.
It likely was, yes. The virus, as we know, was first detected in Wuhan in late 2019. Yeah. And the origins, well, they remain fiercely disputed, don't they?
There are basically two dominant theories.
Right. The most widely accepted scientific one initially was a zoonotic jump, the novel coronavirus jumping from animals, possibly via an intermediate host like a pangolin, in one of Wuhan's wet markets.
But the complication?
The complication is the sheer geographic proximity of that market to one of the world's largest and most advanced virology laboratories, the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which was known to be conducting research on coronavirus. That proximity has fueled persistent, and many argue credible, speculation about a possible lab leak origin. We still don't know for sure.
Regardless of the origin, though, China's initial... It seemed affected at first.
Paradoxically, yes. China's authoritarian system, with its ability to impose total control, initially seemed uniquely suited to managing the crisis. They implemented mass lockdowns in Wuhan and other areas in early 2020 far more quickly and arguably effectively than the struggling, often chaotic, decentralized responses we saw in many Western democracies.
But that advantage didn't last, did it?
No, that perceived benefit reversed dramatically later on. By 2022 and into 2023, even after effective global vaccination campaigns were well underway, and most of the rest of the world was reopening and learning to live with the virus, Xi maintained his draconian, inflexible, zero-COVID lockdowns.
Why, when the rest of the world was moving on?
It seems to have been about maintaining the appearance of total control, proving the superiority of the Chinese system. But this continuation of totalitarian policy, long after it seemed medically necessary or rational to many, garnered unprecedented internal criticism. There were protests, online dissent. It really shook his control, maybe for the first time since his ascent. It was a massive political gamble.
And the nature of those later lockdowns was quite something.
Truly disturbing. The images of entire residential tower blocks being sealed up, welded shut sometimes, literally imprisoning potentially millions of people inside their homes for days or weeks at a time during relatively minor outbreaks. It was a visible, suffocating expression of that strong central control mandated by Xi Jinping thought, taken to an extreme. Finally, let's touch on the defining economic dynamic of our current era, the Sino-American economic Cold War.
Xi seems to have actively fostered this, hasn't he, through state-backed competition?
Yes, ordering or enabling, depending on your view, intellectual property theft from U.S. tech companies, and systematically using state subsidies and scale to undercut American businesses internationally, aiming for market dominance in key sectors.
And the success of that strategy is pretty undeniable now.
It really is. Just look at the global electronic car market. Chinese manufacturers like BYD have, in many segments and regions, completely undercut American rivals like Tesla on price and gained huge market. Or consider the shockwaves caused by the emergence of these cheap, incredibly efficient Chinese AI models like DeepSeek in early 2025.
Right, demonstrating they could perform the core functions of something like OpenAI's Chat. But for a tiny fraction of the cost and energy demand, that's a game changer.
A massive game. And this success has, understandably, driven increasingly sharp political antagonism from U.S. President Joe Biden publicly referred to Xi as a dictator. Donald Trump's relationship was peculiar. Started off somewhat muted in early 2025, but then quickly escalated as he launched an all-out trade war, focused specifically on Chinese goods later.
And Xi's response to this pressure, has he backed down?
Not at all. His public response throughout 2025 has been clear and defiant, making pronouncements that absolutely signal China is not some economic minnow to be bullied anymore by the United States, and making it clear that China would retaliate with its own sanctions, its own tariffs, its own measures in this developing economic war. That relationship, that tension, remains the most volatile and central factor shaping global stability today. So Xi Jinping's story, his biography, it's definitely still being written, but we can already start to draw some pretty clear lines regarding his legacy, can't we?
Yeah. Absolutely. He turned 72 back in June 2025. He's currently midway through his third term, which, thanks to that 2018 constitutional change, is constitutionally limited. And there's really no political sign that he intends to wield power anytime.
And that's critical to keep emphasizing, because it sets him completely apart from the entire post-Mao party tradition. Remember, there's that unwritten internal rule that Chinese leaders are generally considered ineligible for the top body, the Politburo Standing Committee, once they reach 68 years of age.
But Xi is the exception.
He is the singular, powerful exception to that rule, which just demonstrates his absolute dominance over the party's own institutional restraints.
So a fourth term seems highly likely.
Almost certain, barring major health issues, that would take him well into his late 70s. Now, a fifth term, which would take him into his 80s, that's perhaps less likely. Even with his absolute power, the system does generally favor transitions to slightly younger leadership eventually, especially if the economy really starts to sputter badly.
And those remaining challenges are significant, aren't they? Domestically.
Oh, they're not small. Domestically, the era of the Chinese economic miracle, that incredible, sustained 8% to 11% GDP growth year after year, that's demonstrably over. The economy is slowing significantly, and the country is grappling with the enormous internal debt bomb created by that excessive building boom we talked about.
And layered on top of that is the demographic challenge.
A massive demographic challenge, yeah. That quarter-century-long one-child policy, which ran from the late 1970s right up into the 2010s, it has left China with a deeply lopsided and rapidly aging population.
The dependency ratio is getting really tough.
The math is brutal. The state now has to somehow deliver on that promise of common prosperity to an increasingly old population, supported by a shrinking working-age cohort, all while managing a slowing, debt-laden economy. How Xi manages that fundamental structural tension over the next 5 to 10 years, how he deals with economic gravity, that will largely define his ultimate historical legacy.
But his immediate legacy, looking back over the past 12-plus years, that seems pretty cemented already.
I think so. Xi Jinping is undeniably the most powerful Chinese leader since Mao Zedong himself. He's surpassed Deng Xiaoping, certainly in terms of consolidated personalized power.
And globally.
His rule has undeniably cemented China's position as the world's second most powerful, a true political, economic, and increasingly military rival to the United States on the world stage. In the eyes of the party faithful, he's the leader who correctly identified and decisively countered the fundamental weaknesses, corruption, lack of central control that they believe caused the Soviet Union's irreversible descent into decay and collapse following its own period of rapid growth. He saved China from that fate, in their view. Hashtag. So, as a wrap-up, let's try and synthesize these profound contradictions that really define Xi Jinping. We've traced his incredible journey, haven't we, from those surprising, really straitened circumstances of his youth, son of a purged official, forced into that brutal rural exile.
Right. To his lightning-fast rise through the ranks. A rise based almost entirely on consistent, maybe even ruthless effectiveness as this highly skilled regional administrator, getting things done in Hebei, Fujian, Zhejiang.
That administrative skill certainly brought him to power. But as always, it's the use of that power that matters most for his legacy. And there seem to be two prevailing, really starkly different views that will probably follow him through history.
What are they?
Well, view one, is he fundamentally a nefarious, authoritarian leader focused primarily on brutal repression? You point to Xinjiang, the crushing of Hong Kong's freedoms, the aggressive takeover of the South China Sea, the increasingly inflammatory rhetoric towards Taiwan.
Okay, that's one view. What's the alternative?
The alternative view is that he's primarily a figure focused on establishing the only conditions he genuinely believes can ensure China's long-term survival and eventual global preeminence. That means an ordered, disciplined state that maximizes Chinese economic growth and national power above all else.
Even if that requires the absolute suppression of civil liberties and individual...
Exactly. Following what he sees as the unavoidable lessons learned from the Soviet collapse.
Yeah.
That strong central control isn't just desirable, it's essential to avoid disaster.
Whichever lens you choose to view him through, his impact on the 21st century is already undeniable. He rules based on this core belief. China must avoid the fate of the Soviet, and the only way to do that is through absolute central part control that's ultimately justified by the promise of continuous improvement, stability, and prosperity for the mass.
And this leaves us, as always, with our final provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider. We've seen that Xi Jinping thought demands stability and justifies absolute control by guaranteeing, or at least promising, common prosperity to the mass. But given those massive domestic challenges we just discussed, the slowing growth, the rapidly aging population, the debt overhang, how will that ideology adapt if the state can no longer reliably deliver the promised prosperity? What happens when that absolute political control collides head-on with inevitable economic gravity?
A question that refines the next decade, not China.